Happy New Year. 2014. How did we get to 2014? Don't you think it seems a bit mad? I think that seems a very big number. I'm going to talk to you for a few minutes tonight about something that's really spoken to me this week, and I knew very clearly that this was the topic I needed to bring today. And the first thing I wanted to say really was that I want to encourage you, first of all, to hear this for yourself tonight. You know how sometimes you can be listening to a message and you can think, oh, I think that'll help that person over there, and I think that'll help so-and-so over there, and I was having a conversation this week with this person, and they really need to hear that tonight. I really want you to hear it for yourself, because we've been reminded recently how the Bible says today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your heart. So actually, there's something very applicable for each of us. We're required to hear today and listen. Now, it might apply to people you know, it might be something you need to share, but for the next few minutes, make it yours and be very soft-hearted, because sometimes when we hear things that are quite challenging, you want to think, oh, no, that's not me, and sometimes, actually, by listening, it does us some good. Now, Ant, who isn't here this week, did a message a few Saturdays ago, on the 14th of December, that I would encourage you to listen to if you've not heard it, or listen to it again if you have. If you are new tonight, if you go onto our website, rockchurch.org.uk, you can listen to any of the messages for free, however many times you want. And there's one there that he talked about, he linked it to 1 Corinthians 10, which is about the children of Israel and how there were things that they experienced that we can learn from. And some of those things act almost as a warning to us to not trip up over the things that they did. And he talked about some of the things that God's not pleased about. And it's funny, it really made me think, because, we hear so much about how we're loved, accepted, we're forgiven, and the kindness of God is absolutely limitless. But there's also this line that he said that I've not been able to get away from. He said, don't mistake experiencing the kindness of God as proof that you are living in the purpose of God, because the two are not connected. And if you actually think about that, that's a thought really worth pursuing. And I'm perhaps going to do that a little bit tonight. Now, have you ever felt like your story's a little bit of a roller coaster with the ups and downs of life? It says, doesn't it, that in the Message version of the Bible says life is a corkscrew that cannot be straightened. There's going to be the twists, the turns, the ups and downs. That's what it's like. And for the people who represented God's people at the time, and I spent a lot of time today cutting a bunch of this stuff out because it was getting too long. I can't explain every single little rabbit trail that we could go off here, but there was a group of people who was sort of symbolic of God's people at the time, and they went on a little bit of a journey. At one point they were slaves, and God miraculously rescued them from slavery. And the story's a long story, and it's worth a read, but they end up being rescued, and it is a miraculous thing. It's not like your normal everyday occurrence. It's like oceans parting and various plagues, and it's quite a dramatic story. And they go from this place that has been very difficult for them, full of hope and promise, that they're going to go to this new land of promise, which sounds all very exciting. And then it takes 40 years to get there. A bunch of them die off, and all of a sudden it's not so pretty and not so exciting anymore. And sometimes it can feel for us, can't it, like, yay, we set off, and then it just seems to take forever to get anywhere, and the excitement that we had at first and the rejoicing we had over how wonderfully we've been rescued soon becomes, long forgotten, doesn't it? Because we end up somewhere where we didn't actually want to be and not getting where we wanted to be as quickly as we would like to. Now, undoubtedly, God was very kind to these people, very kind. They ate every day miraculously. You're talking food appearing from the sky, miraculously eating, not visiting Tesco's and putting it in your trolley. It was like miraculous food every day, evidence every day that God was with them. They also drank from rocks and things, like rocks. Quite incredible. That doesn't normally happen, does it? And even things like their shoes didn't wear out. If you'd been wandering around in difficult conditions, their shoes didn't wear out. They had daily evidence that miracles were happening. And was it enough for them? Was it heck? It just wasn't. Now, this is what it says in 1 Corinthians 10. They all experienced great supernatural, amazing rescue and provision, but this is what it says. Experiencing God's wonder and grace didn't seem to mean much. And I think, whoa. So even the fact that they'd seen God's wonder and grace, it ended up not meaning very much in the expression of their life. And when I read that, I found myself pausing thinking, what if I and you and we are experiencing daily God's wonder and grace, but then we become to the point where it doesn't mean much anymore? And that frightens me a little bit in a good way, thinking I don't want that to be my story. I don't want to have experienced God's wonder and grace and be experiencing his wonder and grace, and then it turn out that it doesn't actually mean much in my life. Now, immediately after that verse, it says, the same thing could happen to us. And it lists some stuff that we could trip over and says that we must try and learn from their mistakes, because it says, don't think it's easy. Don't think that once you've seen a miracle or two, you're going to have this God thing sus for the rest of your life and you're never going to trip up. Because if we do that, we can get very self-confident. And it said, actually, we need to really cultivate a kind of God confidence. Now, these people who were treated very kindly for 40 years, many of them died without getting to their there. Last week we heard about how God had said to Abraham, go to a land I will show you, somewhere out there. And we heard last week, if you were here, that God has a there for all of us. He has somewhere that a direction is set that he wants us to experience and go to. We're called to be pioneers, to set off to go somewhere bigger and greater and to experience everything that God has for us. And I don't want to miss my there. Would you like to get to your there, wherever your there is? Now, another thing we heard last week, and Joel's reminded us of it tonight, that we only have our today. We only ever have today. You can't go back to your past. You can't skip forward to next week. You're actually only in today. So the choices we make have to be about today and where we are. Now, so as a very practical start to 2014, I want to talk to you about poison. Yay. Yay! That's a nice, positive topic. This is a word that came to me this week, and I'm going to actually talk about venom or salt. And this will make sense as we go through. Because part of that story, this warning section in 1 Corinthians 16, was one of the things it said that they tripped up over. It says, we must never try to get Christ to serve us instead of us serving him. They tried it, and God launched an epidemic of poisonous snakes. Nice. Yay. So, let's have a little look at the story, and then I'm going to say a few comments about it, and it will hopefully help you. Look, I put rock salt, because I thought with the rock. So I put rock salt. It'll make sense later. Okay. Can I have that story up then? It's called The Snake of Fiery Copper. Ooh, here we go. They set out from Mount Hor along the Red Sea Road, a detour around the land of Edom. The people became irritable and cross as they travelled. Hands up, whoever gets irritable or cross. If your hand's not up, I think you're lying. No offense. They spoke out against God and Moses. Why did you drag us out of Egypt to die in this God-forsaken country? No decent food, no water. We can't stomach this stuff any longer. So God sent poisonous snakes among the people. They bit them, and many in Israel died. The people came to Moses and said, we sinned when we spoke out against God and you. Pray to God, ask him to take these snakes from us. Moses prayed for the people. God said to Moses, make a snake and put it on a flagpole. Whoever is bitten and looks at it will live. So Moses made a snake of fiery copper and put it on top of a flagpole. Whoever is bitten and looks at it will live. Have I just reread that first bit, anyone? Yes, I've done it again, haven't I? So Moses made a snake of fiery copper and put it on top of a flagpole. Anyone bitten by a snake who then looked at the copper snake lived. Now, some of you have been around a while here. Might remember years and years ago how Anth did a series called It's Not My Destiny to Die in the Desert. I reckon it's about 15 years, but it might be more than that. And this was one of the stories that he used to talk about an issue that I'm going to remind us of a little bit tonight. So really, I'm stealing his message from 15 years ago and adding a bit to it. Because actually, this is what came to me this week. I was just pottering around my house, and I thought, poison. And I immediately remembered this story. So I've had a little look at it. And I think it's a useful time to remind us of it. And I know this week, when I started thinking about it, thinking, oh, yeah, that's me. Oops, that's me as well. These people were walking. They were on a journey trying to get somewhere. And we're all obviously here today because we've bought into the idea that we're trying to go somewhere in this God thing. We're trying to find out about it at whatever level, we're journeying. And we're open to our wherever our there is. But don't you find sometimes that things at work, at church, in your family, just when you're out minding your own business, make you really irritable and you feel cross. And those things are a part of our everyday life, because life happens and not everything always goes our way. Now, the journey to wherever we're going and all the faces that has and all the people that we pass along the way, because so often our issue can be people, because people don't choose how we want them to choose and don't do how we want them to do, and they're just not like us. Because if everyone was like me and thought like me, how much easier life would be. But the journey can be very difficult. These are the things I've put about how the journey can be. Here's a cheerful thought. Difficult, tedious, never-ending, challenging, repetitive, painful, tiresome, and draining. Yes, sometimes that's how it feels. And we all have those feelings, and we all have the attitudes that emerge along the way. And just like rocks coming to the surface, we heard a couple of weeks ago that when you're in ground, in soil, the rocks work their way to the surface because those rocks need dealing with so that your soil's decent enough to plant stuff in. That stuff comes up to the surface, and those things can be a great alarm bell system for us. When we catch ourselves feeling irritable, when we catch ourselves feeling annoyed, it's a great opportunity to think, right, come on, what's going on in me? Talk to someone about it. This is going on, help me sort it out. God says, let's reason together. So sometimes in life, stuff happens, you need to talk about it, you need to share it with someone, you need to reason it out with someone, deal with the stuff and move on. Now that's all well and good, but sometimes, the thing that you are struggling with goes beyond something that you're trying to sort out, and it becomes something that has bitten you to the point where it's like poison in your body and you can no longer function with that thing that you are trying to work through. And what had happened with these people was, instead of seeing the things that were going on with them as an opportunity to diagnose where they were at, let's think about what's going on in me. Why is the wonder and the grace of God not working for me anymore? Who can I get with to help me work this through? It actually just became something that really turned into a good old grumble about everything that was not working for them. So what did they do? They spoke out against God. They spoke out against Moses. Why did you drag us out of Egypt to die in this God-forsaken country? So they came to the conclusion that they shouldn't have. They were dragged out of Egypt. They forgot that they'd actually begged to leave Egypt because Egypt was so awful. God-forsaken, so they've come to the conclusion that God's not even in this thing anymore, when in fact he is. There's no decent food, even though it's coming out of heaven every day. There's no water, even though rocks are splitting open and it's there for them. We can't stomach this any longer. Now, can you see how they've got to a point where what they're seeing just isn't true, but to them, it is all consuming? Can you see that? And we can go there, can't we? And one of the things that is a symptom that we've lost the wonder and the grace of life can be when we get to just moaning. Who moans sometimes? Or is it just me? Most of my moaning in recent years has been about a certain government official. I will name no names. I had a big rant about him in here, and I had to delete it because I thought my point is that I'm not allowed to moan. But there is a certain government official who has made a number of choices in the last 2 years that has dramatically affected my workplace. And Ruth's looking at me. She does the same job as me. She knows who I mean. And I disagree very strongly with some of the decisions that this man has made. So have I prayed for him and had positive conversations about him and really sought the Lord about how to support this man? No, I've moaned about him. I've joined with my fellow colleagues and I have had a good old moan about him every time he's made an awful decision. And it occurred to me the other day that I'm not enjoying my job very much at all. And when I trace it back, I stopped enjoying the job when I began moaning most heartfeltly, is that a word, about this man. Now, you could say, well, I'm not enjoying my job because the man has made it worse. Or you could say, I'm not enjoying my job because actually in me moaning about the system, I've lost the wonder and grace of what it is I'm actually supposed to be doing in my job. So that's a practical example for you. And think about in your life, what is the thing, probably a person, that you spend the most time being negative about, thinking negatively about, talking negatively about, finding other people to agree how negative it all is. Think about it, because that will be part of the issue, is how we talk. Right, let's take this a little bit further. The focus became who was to blame for their predicament. So we get into blame. Who's to blame for where I am? And who was against them? God was at fault. Their leader was at fault. They were all together in agreement, so therefore they must all be right. The journey was not happening in the way it should be, in the time scale they expected, with suitable comfort to make it a journey worth making any longer. What was happening was, in their opinion, utterly wrong. And we have all been there, and we all get what it's like when we feel like we're there. Now, what comes next is they come to the accusing questions. These are the rhetorical questions because actually they've already decided what they think. They were dragged from Egypt. There we are, those rose-tinted glasses. Everything was better back then. Notice how once you get into this state, it's not about today anymore. It's about back then. How much better was it back then before all this nonsense happened? They've forgotten about the slavery they were in, and also they've now come to the conclusion that they're dying. They actually do end up dying, but mainly because they come to the conclusion that they're dying. They weren't actually dying until they came to the conclusion that that's what was happening, because again, it starts to be about the future. So we were better back then. The past was all rosy. The future's going to be awful. Where's today? Where's the wonder and grace at what's being given them today? Where's the trust that there's still a process going on? Where's all that gone? It's completely gone out of the window. Now, there's no decent food, no decent water. Everything that was being given them in that day became utterly worthless because they couldn't process where they were in the story. And because they couldn't get their head round it and didn't understand it, rather than asking good questions and saying, right, I'm not getting it, someone help me out, they came to conclusions that actually were simply not true. So, my next thing I've put is don't let's kid ourselves, because given the same circumstance, we would have probably got to grumbling. And in reality, I think we grumble at a lot less than they were experiencing. Now, this is the problem. This is where the poison come in, because I do believe that God gives us a picture in this story, using the snake, of really what it does to us. A snake is not poisonous if it's handled. So if you pick it up, it's not poisonous. But if it bites, venom is going to be released into your system. So handling stuff in life, and I wanted to... Whenever you say things like this, you think people are going to go out the door thinking you're never allowed to have a problem with anything or to say anything negative. That's not what we're talking about at all. Sometimes we have stuff going on and we have to talk about it and reason it. But this kind of conversation is not about moving something forward and reasoning it. It's about when life has bitten you to the point where really you're just in a negative frame of mind. You're joining with others who agree with you, just to really, and the grumbling isn't productive anymore. It's actually a big fat lie that will really be robbing you of everything that you could be experiencing now. Letting it bite will bring venom, and this is what venom does. It gets to your heart and your cardiovascular system. It actually gets into your central nervous system, and it gets into your brain, and it will take over and destroy you from the inside out. Not because God is punishing you, this isn't what it's about, but because if a seed produces after its own kind, you're sowing constantly a negativity and a grumbling and an againstness, and all of those things starts to produce a harvest in your own life that actually isn't a very good position to be in. And some of you in here tonight might feel like you've been bitten and you wonder why. You feel like the situations that used to give you life now seem to drain you. The wonder and joy you used to get out of something now's just tiresome and dull and tedious. And instead of handling the things that have irritated you and made them cross, they've become now entrenched in you and you've been bitten by them. Now, we moan to ourselves, we get with others and moan, and we talk about who's to blame, how it was better before. We predict doom and gloom for the future, and we do not value the very breath and grace and love we have been provided with today. And we don't see that kindness, so we end up quitting our purpose in life. Now, I've put here, God help me to avoid the venom when I get irritated and cross, because when I read that, I think, God help me. God help me in the situations I find irritating and I get cross about, to avoid letting them bite and to avoid letting them poison my system. Now, a bunch of them died, but God provided a solution. And what was his solution? He said, I'm going to stick this thing in the middle of you, and if you look up and look at that, the poison won't kill you. And it says when Jesus was lifted up, he would draw all men unto himself. And there's always, always in life, Jesus is always lifted up to provide a solution for the poison. Now let me briefly mention this antidote then. I've titled it Venom or Salt because I think actually in life we can choose to be one or the other. We can choose to be people that go around talking about the negatives, missing the wonder and grace, getting bogged down with what's happened in the past and what's going to happen in the future, and getting with other people who agree with what we think and talking about everyone else is getting it wrong. We can go there. And in doing that, we become part of the poison. Or we can be salt. Didn't you love that video clip with that guy, that bagger called Johnny? And when I was watching it, thinking, that man is salt. What do I mean by that? The Bible tells us, if you put the next bit up for me, Joe, Matthew 5 says, let me tell you why you are here. You are here to be salt seasoning that brings out the God flavors of this earth. If you lose your saltiness, how will people taste godliness? You've lost your usefulness and you will end up in the garbage. Yay, cheerful. There's a story of Elisha in the Bible who was a very, very godly man. And the men come from a city, come to him one day and they say, look at this, our city is in a great location, but the problem is our water is polluted and nothing grows. Please, will you help us out? And he says, bring a brand new bowl and put some salt in it. He goes to the spring, sprinkles the salt and says, I've healed this water. It will no longer kill you or poison your land. And it worked. It worked. The poison that was in the water ended up being cured by the salt. And part of our purpose in life that God calls us to is, yes, we receive his kindness and we walk in his kindness and we're forgiven. Even if we choose to go and poison everyone we meet with negative talk, you're still forgiven. Wow, isn't that amazing? You can actually go and be somebody that poisons every single conversation with as much negative stuff as you can, and you're still completely loved, accepted, and forgiven, because grace is limitless. We've just heard that song. Grace is absolutely limitless. So the kindness of God says, if you want to do that with your life, you may do that. But I don't want to do that with my life. I want to be salt, because I would like to somehow season the world and make it taste a little bit better. Like that wonderful, I love that video of how he just decided to make everybody's day in that supermarket just a little bit better, just by doing something very simple. And how does the Father's good news sprinkle the world with salt when even the people who claim to follow Christ are moaning about each other? How the world's not going to be salted for as long as Christ followers are moaning about each other. There's an almighty challenge in that, isn't there? And even more horrifying is that we expect to flavour our world with love and grace when we haven't got a positive word to say. I don't think it can happen. We can be forgiven in it, but I don't think we can meet our purpose. Now, salt can sting, can't it? Sometimes salt can sting, and sometimes being salt might sting and might sting others, but it cleanses. We've learnt recently about how Jesus washed the disciples' feet, and our purpose has to always been to wash each other clean, not pick out each other's faults and point out where the bits are dirty and not as they should be, but to actually clean and wash each other. And we can take that route of grumbling, but it's bites. Now it says, doesn't it, everything is permissible, but not everything is beneficial. And tell me something, after you've grumbled and moaned, does it actually make you feel better and change anything, because it does temporarily, let's be honest. When you've got a bunch of people to agree with you, it can feel good. But afterwards, it doesn't. And actually, afterwards, you're left with something almost like a stain that doesn't do any good. So do you want to be venom or salt today, this year? Would you like to get to the end of 2014 and have sprinkled everyone's day with something positive by the end of the year? I don't think that's a bad aim for a new year. I think that sounds quite nice. And I know that I will experience his kindness every day of this year, no matter what I do. Which, again, I just find that phenomenal when you think about it, because people don't work like that. God's a one-off for that. But I also know that I have to choose each day to handle the things that irritate and make me cross and not let them bite me. Now, watch your conversation. Let's have a look at this. By the time the complaint reached Moses, it had become an us. So by the time they'd got to Moses to have a grumble, a bunch of them had got together and all figured out what the problem was. And it wasn't them, it was him. So look at this in 1 Corinthians 15, 29, verse 31. It's the last one, I think, Joe. Thank you. Why do you think I keep risking my neck in this dangerous work? I look death in the face practically every day I live. Do you think I'd do this if I wasn't convinced of your resurrected Messiah, Jesus? Do you think I was just trying to act heroic when I fought the wild beasts at Ephesus, hoping it wouldn't be the end of me? Not on your life. Now, this is the bit. It's resurrection, resurrection, always resurrection that undergirds what I do and say, the way I live. If there's no resurrection, we eat, we drink, the next day we die. And that's all there is to it. But don't fool yourself. Don't let yourself be poisoned by this anti-resurrection loose talk. Bad company ruins good manners. So I thought that was fascinating. What's one way to embrace the purpose of God as well as his kindness? To let resurrection ooze out of your conversation. Not because we go around talking all the time with everyone we meet about the resurrected Jesus, as in, did you know Jesus is risen from the dead? I'm talking about the spirit of what we say. That in all of our conversation, there's a sense in which what's lost can be found, what's dead can come to life, what's over can be brought back, that there's hope in everyone, that there's trust in everyone, that there's belief for everyone, that it is indeed limitless, that nothing is over, because there's a limitless grace and love, and that's what somehow comes out of our conversation. That's the vibe that comes off us. People are not written off. It says, don't be poisoned by talk that says it's over. And things like where it says, we eat, we drink, the next day we die. If it's not about something other than if it's just about what we see, it's going to be about what makes me feel good now, what satisfies me now. What's all this about? Let's just do what feels good, seems good to me. It's not going to be about anything beyond that moment. And the truth is, if there is a risen Christ alive in the earth today, and he's living in us, and that's the hope of glory for the people you know, the world we live in, then do you know what? There's a job to be done in getting that message out there and communicating it as loud as we can, that there's hope and faith and love and limitless grace for everyone. There is limitless grace for this politician whose decisions I do not like. Or do I say that grace has limits? It's for everybody but him because I don't like what he's doing. Because when you actually bring it down to the people who are affecting you and your world, all of a sudden that there are limits. So it does say one last thing on this bit, and then I'm finishing it off. Bad company ruins good manners. If you are having conversation that is poisonous, I'll tell you how you'll know. You'll be mean, and you'll be rude, and you'll be unkind. So if you want to know whether or not you're having conversation that's poisoning you, ask yourself, am I being mean? Am I being rude? And am I being unkind? Because if you are, there's some poison got into your conversation. You've forgotten about resurrection. You've forgotten about hope. And it's going to bite you and not be good for you. So let's season the world. If we've got good news and we claim we've got good news, then shouldn't our conversation be filled with good news? Or do we not have good news? Do we only have doom and gloom? It's easy to love the lovable in your life. And it's easy to face the easy stuff. But that's no measure of your character. It really isn't. How do you handle your grumbles? If you're willing to face that about yourself and really be honest about that, you'll probably, like me, feel this urgent need to look to Jesus with absolute gratitude, his love and wonder and grace that forgives, and let him deal with that poison that's perhaps clogging up your spring. It says, guard your heart, because everything springs from that and everything flows from that. So my prayer has been this week, create in me a clean heart. Because if God's creating a clean heart in me, what will flow out of me will cleanse like salt, and it will season and be beautiful. It says, renew a right spirit within me. Joshua and Caleb wandered round in that desert. But it said that when the time came for them to finally get to there, and there's no denying it must have been difficult. It must have been difficult for Joshua and Caleb as well, going round and round and round, constantly at the mercy of other people's lousy decisions, wanting to push on, but people not willing to get hold of the Spirit to move forward. But when the time came, because they'd kept a fresh spirit, they were ready. They were ready to move and when the chance came. And do you know what? I want to be ready. Don't you want to be ready for whatever life looks like, for whatever the next step is, to have yourself in a position where you're ready? So this is my challenge, and I thought it was fascinating that we sang that song for the first time tonight, Limitless, because this was my final thought for you. Do not limit grace to what you think is enough. When you hit your line for where grace should extend, in your opinion, and where you think it's reasonable for grace to be, then be unreasonable with it. So think about where grace won't push to in your life right now, and then push grace there. Say, I'm going to move my limits on grace. Wherever my limits of grace have been up to this point, I'm going to push them out this year. I'm going to make my grace limitless. I'm going to give grace to the stuff that right now I think, no, that's too far. I'm going to go there. And I asked you this question already, but I'll ask it you again. Think of who you think the most negative thoughts about or moan about the most. And ask yourself, are you willing to push grace there? Will you push grace there? Or is that your limit? It's really challenging, isn't it? It's really challenging. Will you forgive those people? Will you extend grace and forgiveness and love to that person, to those people? Even if they don't do it in return, that's not actually the point. That's not the point. You can only decide where you will set your grace. Will you limit it or make it limitless? Does grace for you have to be reasonable? The gift of God's grace is truly shocking. It's shocking how much grace he gives. Absolutely shocking. And that's where we have to trust that when we push grace to a limit that we think is too far, that it will work. That actually it will work. For us to have credibility as we call ourselves Christ followers, we need to be salt, not venom. There will be grace for us to be venom. Every time I say that, I think it's shocking. That's why grace is so shocking. There will be grace for us to be venom because God is kind, but his purpose, if that's not connected, that might be the price we pay for holding on to our hurts and attitudes. So are you willing for it to cost you that? Are you willing to lose your purpose by holding on to your attitudes? You might be. That might be your choice. You have the freedom to choose because that is how shocking grace is. Okay. If you want to be salt and you want to be somebody that somehow seasons this world with good news, and you want to be somebody who has realised, I have got into grumbling with some people. Grumbling for the sake of grumbling. Grumbling without a purpose and moving it forward, just having moans about things. If you want to be someone today, because you can only choose today, who sets yourself on a direction to be salt, rather than to poison conversations or your own heart by the things you're thinking and doing, then stand with me and let's pray that God will help us to keep to that course. God, I want to thank you that Because of your incredible kindness and grace, we actually are incredibly free to live our lives however we choose, and yet still be under your love and kindness and forgiveness. And that really is such a phenomenally good way, such incredibly good news. And tonight I want to thank you first and foremost, Lord, that you have equipped us with that choice to make. But I know tonight that many people in here, like me, want to set a direction that somehow we get that good news shouted loud and proud to those around us and to our world. And we are so aware that we have our grumbles and our things we struggle with, and those things can be so overwhelming. And Lord, sometimes we just get it. We just make bad choices, and we don't have a good influence on the people around us. So Lord, tonight we say we're sorry. We know we're forgiven, but we respond to that forgiveness by saying, Lord, we're sorry, and help us to do it differently. Help us, Lord, to be wise in our conversations. Put people around us that will move us forward, that will challenge us where they need to challenge us, that will make clear to us where really the influence we're having is going to be detrimental to you and your good news. And we stand before you today, Lord, a people willing to be used by you to salt our world, to help make it clean, Lord, to help clean hearts and clean lives. And Lord, create in each of us a pure heart and renew a spirit in us that is ready to take on the challenges, that is ready to take on who you are into our world. And God, help us, Lord. Help us to be an expression of you in this earth, and help us to have the credibility of Christ's followers, because who we are and what we say and how we live our life rings with a sincerity about it, Lord, that is infectious. And thank you, Jesus, tonight for these people stood here. I ask that you will help them where we have been poisoned, Lord. Thank you that we look to you tonight and you make us clean, and help us to deal with the consequences, and help us to be strong and confident in you, Lord. Thank you, Jesus. Bless everyone in here tonight, Lord. Thank you so much for your peace and your love and your limitless grace. Thank you, Jesus.